What's going on, everybody? It's EricRayweather back here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Madden 20 gameplay. We're going to be talking about why it is put up or shut up time for EA, why it is make or break for the game, and why everything is really riding on what they have claimed to do in terms of cleaning up the gameplay this year. We're going to talk about past issues, what we need to be fixed, what needs to be better, and kind of where the future needs to go in terms of Madden and its gameplay. Now, I have a special guest on my channel today that is going to be talking with me about this. We're going to talk about the gameplay here, and then part 2 of our discussion is going to be over on his channel, where we dive into things like franchise and career mode. So I will link that below. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll get right into the video.
What is going on, guys? If you aren't familiar with me, my name is Ryan Moody. I've got a YouTube channel as well. I'm sure Eric will be kind enough to put a link down in the description to it. But what we've decided is to kind of come together, which to some people may be a surprise. We're kind of opposite ends of the Madden spectrum, and give you guys some impressions about where Madden is currently and where we want Madden to go in the future. Of course, all this prefaces itself with tons of Madden 20 news that's been coming out. And I guess the first thing I'd like to say is I'm really glad that we are getting that news that early. I really like the idea that they're coming out with these Twitch streams and they're trying to share as much of Madden 20 information early and with the community.
No, definitely. I think that, last year they did it a little bit earlier than normal. This year they've done it even earlier, because if you think back to Madden 18, if you remember how late we were waiting for news, like we didn't even see gameplay, I think, of the game until like a week before the game was coming out, and we didn't get any news until maybe a month before. And then last year they kind of went about a month early. This year they're about 2 months early. So I definitely think that's good. Kind of get people, in the groove and understanding like what they're trying to do this year, and like letting them know, hey, if the game's for you, if these are the things you're interested in. But I think at the end of the day, most people are worried about gameplay, and that is what we haven't seen yet, and that's what most people want to see. All the other stuff sounds good, but if the gameplay isn't improving, then a lot of people, that's a make or break for them. So that's really what we need to see now.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, let's be fair. I think a lot of what's being said are a lot of the same things we've heard in the years past. Now, granted, there's different ways of approaching them. I mean, you're going to talk about, the X factors. Sure, it sounds like those are going to give us the capability of unique feeling players that respond differently in the course of a game or a season, or even for a team for that matter. But like you said, to me, I think there's a lot of people in the community that have heard this so many times. The only way we're going to be satisfied is through seeing the gameplay. I think the problem is when they talk about the way these character traits are going to be, I don't really know if seeing gameplay is going to give us a true impression of how these players differ from each other. I think it's going to be something where you have to play the game. And obviously with the beta out shortly, with the demo not coming, I just don't know how possible that.
Yeah, I think the abilities altogether, I think is a great thing. But I was telling somebody else this just the other day. I said it still is going to come down to the gameplay, because if the gameplay is still as bad as it was these last couple years, then the abilities are just going to highlight even more how bad the gameplay is. Like, you can't, the abilities themselves could be fun, but if the gameplay is bad and you have that on top of it, all it's going to do is show you just how worse the gameplay is. But if the gameplay is actually improved and a little bit more polished, like they have been saying or alluding to, then I think the abilities are going to work in the opposite way and highlight how much better the gameplay actually is. So it's still, gameplay features are great, and I think we all want them, but they're only as good as the core gameplay. And we know that the core gameplay with Madden has a lot of work, has a lot of fundamental problems. So I'm curious to see what they've done this year, because Clint has told me directly, and then even, in the Game Informer article, Mike Young, they said that it's going to be the most bug-free game we've had in a while. They've cleaned up the animations, and they've had a lot of time this year to do that. So I'm just curious to see, how true that is when the game comes out. Because once we get our hands on it, once millions of people have their hands on the game, it takes on a different life at that point. You could test the game as good as anybody, but once millions of people have it, things are going to be found that you didn't find. Things that slipped through the crack are going to, be discovered. So we just have to see how good of a job did they do in polishing up the game. So.
Yeah, no, 110% agree with you. I mean, it's overall impression at the end of the day. If you and me played Madden 20 right now for 20 straight hours, we may never see something that on the first day 6 people may experience. And it's just because the mass number of people playing this game. But to that point, I think overall, at least what I've experienced in terms of feedback that people have given me, this may have been, with Madden 19, one of the least well-received Maddens of all time. And it's not so much from the stance that what they put into the game did not function as designed or didn't deliver on promises. It's that people have almost seemed to be done with the complacency of the same game every single year. And it seems like, if nothing else, the gameplay not changing caught up to Madden this year.
No, I definitely agree to that. I think on top of the fact that if you think of this generation in particular, I think EA has really kind of been dragging their feet in terms of really giving us the depth that we want. So the fact that we're not getting that, but then the gameplay isn't up to snuff either, like, that's the problem. Like, if we had, amazing gameplay, I think people would be a little bit more forgiving of the fact that, like, hey, we need franchising to be deeper. This needs, we need this mode. But when you don't have either, that's kind of where people are starting to get fed up, because they're like, well, what are we doing here? And I think, these last 2 years, not 18, but 19 and then going into 20, I see things that look like a good step in the right direction, but it's about, are they going to keep taking those steps year after year? Because we saw them, I would say, from like maybe 15, 16 up till 18, not too much really came to the game outside of new features for Ultimate Team. So, and we already heard, with the things Rex have said, like, of course the guys at the top, they're not big focused on changing the gameplay or fixing it because they don't think it's marketable, which in fairness, they might be right, because to the casuals, hey, we fixed the gameplay. Like, I don't think that's going to sell the game to casuals. That might resell the game to the people like us that are hardcore and got fed up and stopped buying the game, the people that boycotted it because they're like, the gameplay is bad. It could resell it to those people, but that's still a minority. So I get that part of it, but I think you still have to realize that having good gameplay is good for your game, and it's going to have people happy who are playing your game and staying on it longer. And if you really want to monetize people, which is what these companies want to do, if you really want to get them into monetize them, well, you have to, at least the gameplay has to be good for them to stay on it, for them to do that. So I think they're kind of starting to see that, but it's a shame that it's kind of gotten to this point. All I hope now is that it just continues to get better, because gameplay has been getting worse for the past 4 years, noticeably. 20 is a really pivotal year for me, because of how they've kind of been boasting about cleaning up the bugs and the animations. If 20 is just as bad as the last 2 years, or God forbid worse, then at that point, all hope and faith in EA from me, in terms of gameplay at least, is going to be gone. This is a very make or break year for me in terms of gameplay.
No, I again, man, I totally agree. They have made this a make or break year. And it's interesting when you talk about trying to monetize the customer. When I look at the situation we're in now, and you go in and you do a play now or a single player or a franchise mode, just as yourself, to me, the gameplay experience you have, whether it's animations that record in tandem, whether it's animations that can't branch off each other, I struggle to understand how someone could come in and say, okay, this gameplay on this offline experience is going to be something that I want to play online. Because there's so much of a dice roll effect, I've always not really fully understood where that bad gameplay we've been talking about makes someone want to make a further investment to go play Ultimate Team. It's really never made sense to me. And to that same point, competitive Madden also kind of takes that same stance of, when you play this game as a user, you realize you're not in control of a majority of the things that happen. You may be able to control the type of catch, for example, that your receiver is going to get, but you're not really able to go up and steer that receiver over or steer that ball exactly like we've been able to in the past. So the gameplay, in my opinion, has always hurt somebody wanting to go spend more money on the product.
Absolutely. I think, because even when, I think it was on Dubby's podcast when Rex said that, he said that the reason they started patching the game so much was because if they were making the investment into the esports, which is tied to Ultimate Team mostly, they need to fix things in order to keep people on the game, because if you have all these issues in the game and people stop playing it because they're tired of dealing with some of these bugs, well, then you can't make money off of them because they're not on the game. So that was interesting to hear that, and that was the first time that I really looked at Ultimate Team more in a way that it's like, hey, a lot of people say that Ultimate Team is the worst thing to happen to the game, but in theory, if we didn't have Ultimate Team right now, would we even get all these patches or bug fixes? Because if you played Madden back in the day, Madden 08, even like Madden 10, issues that the game shipped with, they stayed all year. You just had to, as bad as they were, you just had to figure out a way around them. I mean, we're talking about pause glitches, disconnect glitches, just certain types of nano blitzes. Like, you just had to deal with them all year and find a way around it. We didn't really start seeing the patches become so heavy until Ultimate Team. So what I say is, the gameplay has gotten worse since then, so imagine what we'd have to deal with without Ultimate Team if they weren't patching this game. But I still find it interesting that, the gameplay still continues to be such a problem when they seem to know that, hey, if we want to keep people on the game and potentially make even more money off of them from in-game purchases, you have to make the gameplay better. But it seems like they're okay with patching it and trying to band-aid it, but why not just double down on the actual gameplay and make it better? Just make the game better, because then everybody wins. Then you have people you make money off people buying the game because, hey, the gameplay's better now, so I'll reinvest back into Madden. You have more people staying on Ultimate Team spending money, and then I think the biggest thing is you just have people happy to play your game, because a lot of people, they play Madden obviously because it's the only NFL game, but they're not necessarily happy all the time to be playing it, because it's a chore sometimes with saying, like, I know I'm better than this guy, but because of the nature of the gameplay, it's frustrating to play. Even when you're winning, it's not fun. And I've said this on Twitter. Other people have said it as well. It's like, even winning isn't fun right now for a lot of people in Madden because of how much of a chore it is to deal with the problems in the game. So I just don't know why they haven't seen the bright idea to double down on this sooner, and I'm hoping that going forward that's what they're going to try to do. But there's also the argument of the legacy code being that it doesn't matter how much they double down on it, if they don't rebuild it, it's still going to have issues. So we really have to see how much of this is even able to be cleaned up and fixed, and how much of this is just a product of a bad foundation that absolutely has to be rebuilt.
One thing that really caught me off guard this year was when they came out and basically said that the X factors and some of the things that they've put into gameplay will not 100% translate over to Madden Ultimate Team, that they're going to have basically limited capabilities of what you can do for a player. And that's interesting because I don't know that we've ever seen that dynamic play out before in Madden. A lot of times, whatever has been brought into gameplay has universally went across every aspect, from, playing out a franchise to MUT. So for them to specifically come in this year and say, okay, we're going to add in something, but we're not going to put it directly across the board, at least if nothing else, it does leave me with the impression that they know that it is so powerful in terms of the, I guess, whether it's animation manipulation or whatever they're going to do to these players. And I guess that's probably the nature of the conversation. What are you doing to Pat Mahomes to make him an evasive quarterback? Are you actually making him faster than he is? Or are you making the defense react poorly to make up for that 99 speed? I think a lot of times when you look at the problem Madden has, if you've got Tom Brady 99 speed, Pat Mahomes 99 speed, if you're going to tell me that this evasive quarterback ability is going to make some change, well, how is that change going to be configured? You can't make him faster than 99. The only thing you could do is kind of dumb down the reaction of the defense. And sadly, Madden has taken that stance a lot. We'll make your player better by making the defense react poorly. And I don't know that if they are openly come out and saying they cannot put all these abilities into one team, it makes me wonder if they're already concerned that there's not going to be an overpowering method, because they're not even approaching it. Like, they're not even going to try it and say, like they have in the past, oh, this is overpowered, we need to dial it back. They're coming in right out of the box and saying, yeah, we can't do this, it's going to be overpowered.
Are you talking about what they mentioned last night in terms of you can only have 3 on each side of the ball? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Well, I want to say I think that's also the case for franchise too. I think that's just the case for the X factors. So like the big ones that where you get in the zone. I don't think that is the case for the every down, like just regular superstar abilities. I think you could have as many of those as you want. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's just because they did say that for franchise too, that you can only have 3 on each side of the ball. So I think that's only referring to the X factors, because there's going to be over like 70 players in the game, maybe even over 100 that have regular ability. So I would think that you could have as many of those on each side of the ball as you want. But in terms of the X factor, the zone, the really big game breaking ones when you can activate them in game, I think those are the ones that are limited. But again, I could be wrong. But they did definitely say that was the case for franchise 2. It wasn't just an Ultimate Team thing. I think the difference with Ultimate Team is you have more of the freedom to customize what abilities a player can get based on his archetype. You can't just put crazy things on certain people that doesn't fit, but you have the freedom to kind of choose which ones you want to have active. Whereas in franchise mode or something like that, I think it's kind of just going to be what the player has assigned to him already. But yeah, I'm sure some of these abilities are definitely, like they did mention the one about, with the running QB that's going to make the defense kind of react a little slower, and we never like to hear that, because don't take anything out of the hands of the defense. But I do think that the balance with it is key, because it sounds like for that particular ability there was a lot of things that were a negative for it, like your stamina. You take a huge stamina hit, so you can't just run these plays back to back to back without, it's going to slow you down. Or there are fumbling. If you get hit, there's a fumbling chance that's higher. And especially if you try to do it a couple times in a row with low stamina, your fumbling is going to increase even more. And then also the fact that for those type of running plays for a QB, they're only going to be in playbooks that have, probably like the Ravens or the Panthers that have those running QBs. And those playbooks aren't always necessarily the playbooks that have the popular passing formations that people like, the big meta plays. So I think it's just all about the balance, right? But we never like to see anything that's saying, hey, we're going to kind of limit your defense, because it shouldn't be the answer. But I guess for some of these, maybe that's the only way they could get it to make sense on field. But we definitely would like to see it implemented better than that. But I think, like you said, the other things about, like, the evasive quarterbacks out of the pocket or something like that, I think that's going to probably be animation based, like maybe a little bit more of a speed boost or something, maybe when trying to scramble. But again, as long as contains work and QB spies work, then it shouldn't be an issue. Because if I know that I'm facing a Michael Vick in Ultimate Team, for example, if I know that he has that ability to scramble outside the pocket, and if I'm knowledgeable about that and I put the contains there and they work, then I'm fine with it. Because if I don't put the contains there and he scrambles out, then that's on me, because I knew what I had to do. I don't really care if he gets a speed boost, because I knew what I had to do to stop it and I didn't do it. So as long as those things work, then I don't think the animations for the most part will be a big issue. It just depends. Some of the catch animations could be a problem, though. We know how aggressive catches are. So I think some of them will probably be a little bit of a nuisance in terms of animations, but as long as there's balance for most of it, I think it'll be okay. But it remains to be seen, obviously.
Well, I mean, the problem is that doesn't really translate into actual real life. So when they talk about the quarterback sneaks, for example, there being a delay on the defense. Well, listen, Pat Mahomes is not good at quarterback sneaks because there's this delay on the defense where nobody's in control of themselves. Yet when it gets carried over into Madden, that's exactly what they're doing. And I don't know how you could ever look at something and say the adjustment we're going to make is to modify or delay the human control of this, and that's going to make it better. When you go back and, talked about earlier, all the videos you see, all the issues you see, a lot of those issues, in my opinion, revolve around the user not having control anymore. I was completely out of control at this fumble recovery, or how this ball was defended, or how this running back was trying to be tackled. I didn't have any control over this scenario, and therefore something crazy happened. He shifted through 3 players. It took 4 minutes for the players to pick up a fumble while they jumped up on top of each other. The more they remove that user control historically, the worse the gameplay tends to look when it's actually being recorded. And for them to basically come out and say, well, this is how we're going to do it by the book, I'm really taken back by that. Because again, it kind of accentuates some of the flaws that Madden has.
Right. I think, and I do think that is probably one of the biggest issues with gameplay, especially from someone that tries to play this game at somewhat of a competitive level. Like, I don't compete as the pro players do. But if I'm playing online, I'm absolutely playing to win, and I'm using things that would be considered maybe the meta or cheesy at times, because that's just how I play the game. And I don't like when I don't have control over a situation. People don't like getting aggressive called on because they feel like there's really not much they can do to stop it. Like, it's basically holding a button versus holding a button, and then the game decides. Whereas back in the day, you had glitchier type of catches like rocket catches or the spectacular catches that you can manually trigger. But what I always tell people all the time is, while that was like even more arcadey than the aggressive catches we have today and even more glitchy, there was still the user element to it. There was timing to it, and if you were better at timing yourself on defense, you would win the down the majority of the time. And if you were better on offense, you would win the down. And that's what's not there today, is there is no timing, because if you catch you throw the aggressive catch, you're literally just holding Y. You could close your eyes after you release the ball from the QB, because you don't have to actually click on, you don't have to maneuver, you're just holding Y, and the game at that point is going to determine whether you get it or whether your opponent, gets the swat or maybe the pick, which, in my experience, usually going for the swat is what's better on defense, because if you go for the pick, a lot of times your guy will just stand there and do nothing. Like, if I'm pressing a button, I want my guy to at least animate. Even if he animates and misses it, at least animate, at least do something, because I'm giving that input and you're not actually triggering anything. And I think, like, basically what you said is true. That is the biggest issue for a lot of people, is it's coming. I mean, it's the same thing with some of the plays. I know it's coming. I'm putting a coverage out there that should stop it, and it's not stopping it. It's all about taking control away from the user. It's bad for any game, but especially a game that's trying to be an esport. I always felt like Madden was not a good esport for that reason, is there's too much RNG in the game right now, and they need to dial that back. Of course, you're going to have some of that because it's a video game, but the level that Madden has right now, I think, is really not a good look, and they need to put more control back into the user's hands for sure.
Well, if you're going to have somebody lose, right? If you're going to have a scenario like that play out where, let's say you throw a pass on me and you do an aggressive catch and I try to go for the interception, I don't get it. The problem ultimately becomes when there's not an animation in that library. As you said, the player just does nothing. The game doesn't have an animation to pull from, and he just stands there. And visually, it looks horrible, especially someone that doesn't have context of how this game works. It literally looks like a player just stood there and let a ball get caught. As you said, the other side of it becomes you learn, okay, I'm not going to go for this interception. I'm going to go for this swat because it's safer. Well, when you're not going for the play... Yeah, when you're not going for the play that you want, because you're going for the play that you think is going to work more, you're not talking about something that can be competitive. You're not talking about something that can be fun. In essence, what you're describing is a scenario that would make you anxious, because I've done everything I can to put myself in the best position to win, but I ultimately know that I'm at the mercy of this game selecting an animation that I have very little control in combating. If the game says it's a catch and I go for the swat, I'm going to have my best opportunity, but there's still that likelihood that the interception animation could be shown, and I'm just going to stand there and watch this player catch the ball. And that doesn't happen in any element of football. No one goes up to defend a pass and ends up standing there.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just they've ever since, and Rex even said it on the podcast, ever since 16, it's like they've gone in that direction. They've taken it out of the user's hands. Because like I say, even back in the day, there were a lot of glitchy things that weren't good for the game. Rocket catching, all that stuff wasn't really good for the game. It wasn't sim, it wasn't what football actually is, but at least there was a user element to it. And if you were the better guy on defense, you could stop it. You could get the interception or you could knock the ball down. But now there's too much of it is leaving it up to the chance of the computer. And I think another thing with that too is not only just like those 50-50 scenarios, but also things that have been put in the game to actually let the computer play for you, like the computer hit sticking for you and things like that. You never used to have that back in the day either. That was a risk reward thing. If you were good at timing hit sticks, you had more of a chance to cause fumbles. But now when the computer could do it for you, and we all know when the computer triggers stuff, a lot of times they do it almost unrealistically, like having like these huge hits come out of nowhere where they didn't even have any momentum built up to deliver a hit like that. It just kind of comes out of a standstill sometimes, and then you fumble. It's like, again, the game is out of the user's hands at that point because you just got unlucky. Whereas like those type of things never used to be in the game. Those things were always a user-based interaction. And now more and more the computer is able to do things for you. And on a certain type of game style, maybe that would be fine. But I don't think, especially if you're trying to compete, I don't think the computer should do anything for you for the most part. I think it should all be user, but I think they obviously have a need to make the game more accessible, which I understand making the game more accessible, but that doesn't make the game necessarily better. It certainly hasn't with Madden, so,
I think any game struggles with accessibility. I mean, how do you present a game to a novice player that's maybe never played it before, doesn't know a lot about the sport, up against somebody that's maybe followed the sport for 20 years and played the game for 20 years? By design, it's hard to do. I think what we're both trying to say is the answer to this question isn't let the game play itself for you. And as you said, you used timing a couple times. We both used the word timing. I think that's really something that Madden's got away from. The user skill of, I'm going to time this. I'm going to have control over this scenario, whether it's a catch, whether it's a hit stick, whether it's a throw. A lot of that has been diluted to the point of, well, just hit these buttons. And it turns the game in a weird position, because Madden is not a button mash. I don't want anybody to get misconstrued here. Yes, there's some combinations you can use, but it's far from who can hit the buttons the fastest. But at the end of the day, it ultimately does come down a majority of the time to who is hitting the right button and who is given the right animation. And when we think about it that way, there's two things that don't come to my mind immediately are, let me spend money playing this and let me play this competitively, because they just don't go hand in hand with where the gameplay is.
Yeah, but it's like, a part of it, it's like you could almost argue that the randomness of the game, or understanding like how some of the randomness works, might make people spend more money in Ultimate Team, because they want the best players, because the best players, that have certain traits, like a big hitter trait, for example, he will hit stick on his own and he will have a good chance of causing that fumble, but you want the best version of that player with the highest hit power. So people do spend more money because of that. And I think still the accessibility does. I do think by default more people do compete because of the accessibility, because it gives the kind of the illusion, I guess, that you're better at the game than you actually are. And some of these players can make it a little bit further than they ever would have been able to a decade ago because of the RNG in the game, but they don't realize that that's why they're making it further. So I don't actually think the accessibility and taking the user stuff away is necessarily bad in terms of getting people wanting to compete or spend money, but it's bad in terms of actually watching the competition, how it looks, and who's actually winning sometimes when maybe they shouldn't be winning because they're not the better player. I think that's where the problem comes in, is you're not going to always necessarily see the best player win on that given day, because some of the unlucky things that can happen, can obviously decide a game. But I definitely think there are people out there that spend more money because of the state the game's in, because with the better players, not necessarily mean that you're going to be better because you have better players, but that because of these animations that can trigger by the computer, you want to get the players that are expensive and have the traits that are going to trigger these animations more frequently than just an average player would. So I don't know. I think it could work both ways potentially. And EA, I'm sure, has more data on that than us. I feel like these big companies, as much as we hate some of the decisions they make, I feel like they have to put the research and the money into the data to know what's going to make them the most money. You would think, at least. So that's what I really wonder. Like, do they know that, hey, this actually does make us more money because of the way we're making the game? You know what I'm saying?